This is a hard one. Very hard one. Lately, from the Gospel of Luke, we have been hearing Luke's narrative and parables about Jesus' interpretation of the relationship between wealth and faith, between possessions and entering into the kingdom of God. And last week, in our gospel, the last line was, "You cannot serve two masters, wealth and God." Jesus has said elsewhere in the Gospel of Luke, a rich man, a rich person cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. He says, in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven, you have to give away everything. You give away all your possessions. And that presents an extraordinarily difficult challenge for us, particularly those of us who live here in the Western world. Because, by all accounts, we are blessed. I did some Googling and discovered that most of us who live in the Western world, generally are in the top 10% of people of means in the world. So when we hear this gospel about the tension between the poor man Lazarus and the rich man who wore fine linens and lived obviously fairly extravagantly, that both of these individuals, they die, and poor Lazarus, because it says he suffered, went to heaven to be into the bosom of Abraham, which is the interpretation, into the bosom of Abraham. He's returned to whence he has come. And yet the poor Lazarus is in Hades, burning in the fires. So what are we to make of this for our own sense of how we balance this relationship between that which we have been blessed with living in this place, and yet a declaration of the gospel that we are called to kind of share and to reach out and to be conscious of those who are struggling and not as fortunate as we are. This past week, I just had the wonderful opportunity to travel to Washington, D.C. with David. And we walked, I think, 100 kilometers, I swear. And we're both limping a bit. But I'd never been to Washington. It's an extraordinary city. We stayed right downtown. And we had some really very interesting conversations about the city and what I discovered, saw, and it had never really dawned on me. Everything is powerful. Like you look at the memorials are powerful. They're built in the kind of Romanesque, the obelisk of the Washington Monument, the White House, the Capitol building is powerful. It's clean. It's white. It's crisp. It's sterile. And it just screams at you of authority and power. And in some ways, entitlement. And it didn't occur to me till kind of last night. I think in the entire 4 days we were there, the miles that we walked, I don't remember seeing one street person. Do you?
I think so.
And yet, in a city the size of Washington, D.C., or Toronto, or Moscow, or whatever, you are going to have people who are struggling, who live on the streets, or there are going to be areas of the town that are run down and where the poverty is rampant and people struggle to make ends meet. Saw none of that in Washington. We also had the great experience of going to the Washington National Cathedral. Awesome. Second largest cathedral in the United States, just behind St. John the Divine in New York City. It must seat 1,500 people. And we were there, the choir and all the regalia and the bishop and all her regalia and all of the people being inducted into the new board of directors of this organization was just awesome and big and powerful and rich and entitled. So then I read the gospel, and I'm thinking, where is the tension that exists between who we are and setting out to achieve, and yet the gospel, the imperative to be conscious of those who are really struggling in life. And all of you have been to places like that. You've been to the Basilica in Rome, or you've been to St. Paul's Cathedral, or Westminster Abbey, or. In the church, the symbols of the church are big and bold, quote, to the glory of God. So what are we to make of the imperative of Jesus to give away all your possessions to enter into the kingdom of God, that you cannot serve two masters? And in this particular case, that poor Lazarus has struggled just to eat the crumbs that have fallen from this rich man's table. And the rich man, after he has died and is in Hades, ironically continues to call upon the poor man Lazarus to do his bidding. Come to me and give me water so I may live. He calls upon Abraham to say, come on, go out to, help me here. And then he says, well, if you can't help me, go to my brothers and warn them of what their light and life might be if they do not turn away and try to live in a new manner. So, for me, just for me, I struggle with knowing where the line is. What am I being called to do? As a privileged white male who lives in one of the wealthiest communities in this nation, what am I being called to do, and that allows me to be faithful to the gospel imperative? What is that point? What is that line? Am I really being called to sell my home and to give away all my possessions? Apparently, yes. Is it practical? Is it realistic? Has that ever happened over the course of Christian history? All we need to do is to look at the basilicas and at the cathedrals and at the wealth that exists within the institutional church. If you were to sell everything and knock it all down and sell it, we could feed this planet 3 times over. So, I'm asking you the question. What do we do? What do we do? What are we being called to? Anybody?
Is that called a pregnant pause?
Pardon?
Is that called a pregnant pause?
Call it a pregnant pause. I would call it a life. I don't know.
We can give of ourselves.
Pardon?
We can give in ourselves that are not necessarily financial ways.
Give of ourselves, but maybe not financially.
In terms of, I think you're right to say to give up everything is not practical, but to give of yourself is.
Okay.
So it's not what you necessarily give in financial terms, but it's what you give in yourself as well.
Right. That's absolutely one way for sure. One of the things that, if you note about this gospel reading, is that, actually you may know it, because the interpretation we have is different, is that Lazarus was laid at the door of the rich man. Somebody actually picked him up and laid him down at the door. Which meant the rich man may have passed him by and never seen him. Lazarus was unable to kind of get around on his own. So it might have been that the rich man paid no attention to Lazarus and his need and his plight. One of the things I'm hearing in this is that it's not about necessarily giving away everything. It is noticing. It is paying attention to. It is being conscious of. It is responding in a manner where you will know in your soul and in your heart that you have done what you are being called to as best you can. I have had the experience of feeling guilty about a particular situation where I am really feeling very helpless. And if I really wanted to get in and get my hands dirty, I could, but it would have taken me time and effort and energy and commitment. And I didn't want to do that, so what did I do? I went to my drawer and I took out a check, and I wrote a check, and I handed the check, and it made me feel a whole lot better. Because I was allegedly doing something. But if I was true to myself, I was being untrue to myself. Because I wasn't being honest that I was trying to sugarcoat or make myself feel better for the guilt I was feeling about not getting my hands dirty. So there's a consciousness, there's a spirit I think that we can be aware of, that we do as the best that we can possibly do. And then the Spirit of God will say to us, the still small voice of God, "Thank you, good and faithful servant." Thank you, good and faithful servant. I was talking to Sister Marguerite this morning. Those of you who don't know Sister Marguerite, she's a nun. She comes to our 8:30 service. She's part of the Sisters of the Church, an Anglican order. And like any order, they need to take oaths of poverty. And so she owns nothing. And she was saying to me this morning, after the sermon, she said, "You know what? When I go to the Solomon Islands, where there's another order of Sisters of the Church, another chapter," she said, "I feel guilty. Because they hand me a bar of yellow soap to do my hair and wash my face and wash my body and wash my clothes. And yet I know when I bring the sisters from the Solomons to Oakville, we walk into Shoppers Drug Mart and their mouths hit the floor. And they cannot get over the overabundance of everything." A nun who's taken a vow of poverty is feeling guilty, but feeling as though she has not done enough. So it is an individual choice where we hear the gospel imperative to clothe the naked, to feed the hungry, to give homes to the homeless, to embrace the lonely, to give refuge to the refugee. Do the best we can within our own capacity. And then listen to the still small voice of God saying, "Yes, good and faithful brother or sister, you have done as I have called on you." Or maybe you can do just a little bit more. It is when we reach that moment that we will know that God has given us the direction and purpose that we're called to understand as sharing in the abundance that we have been given in this part of God's created order. So I offer that as a challenge to think and to pray, to look at ways that we can fulfill the gospel in a way that is reasonable and rational and understood, but yet is consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. Amen.